To our focus this morning in the market, and we're talking about financing the new curriculum ahead of the 7th edition of the Nation Leadership Forum that is being held today at the University of Nairobi Auditorium from 6 to 9 p.m. And the focus this time round is repurposing education for growth. The thematic areas are curriculum implementation, finances, access, equity, and quality. And this morning we shall look at the finances of that curriculum and implementing that new curriculum. As you know, it is the 2663 right now. The pilot has been rolled out, and expectations is that the competency-based curriculum will be rolled out in the coming year. Is this possible? Are there still hitches to this? Well, details of that coming up even as we discuss the same with my panel this morning. Amos Kaburu sitting next to me, Senior Program Officer, Data and Voice at Twaweza East Africa. Next to him, Stella Njunge, who is the CEO at Sanlam Insurance, and Patrick Andika, who is Assistant Director, Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. Thank you for joining me this morning. And I think the first question would go to you, Patrick. In October of this year, you came out with a report that said some few hitches will probably delay the implementation of the new curriculum come January, and one of them was the training of teachers who will be involved in that rollout. At this point, is a question that the training has something to do with the finances, the push is the same, or what exactly is the issue?
Thank you, Gladys. The bigger issue about implementation of the competence-based curriculum, as it were, is the fact that we need to prepare teachers adequately for the implementation. And this preparation ideally requires a holistic approach so that all the stakeholders can be brought on board as you begin to appreciate that financing education in this country is such that there are different stakeholders playing different roles in the education sector. And therefore, when, for example, we went out to prepare teachers, we mainly targeted the teachers of pre-primary 1 and 2, and then grade 1 and 2. And basically, we went for the teachers of public schools. But you realize in this country, there is a huge investment in private schools. And therefore, you will hear a lot of talk about the fact that teachers are not prepared. But in our strategy that we were to use, we were to prepare teachers depending on when the implementation is going to take place. So that ideally we started off with the early years teachers, so that come next year we can be able to go in and prepare teachers for the upper primary and then junior secondary as we progress over the years. But sometimes when you go out there to find out, chances are that you can interview a teacher of class 7, for example, who will tell you they have not been trained. So basically, as far as we are concerned, the teachers of public schools were adequately prepared, and we are again going back this December to continue preparing them for the rollout of the competence-based curriculum.
Well, you touched on the fact that there are different finances by different stakeholders when it comes to the training of these teachers or even implementing the new curriculum. Maybe the question here will be how much or what are the resources dedicated to the training of teachers?
Basically, some resources had been dedicated to the training of the teachers, but our focus was mainly on the teachers of public schools, the grade 1 and the grade 2, and then pre-primary 1 and 2. And we were working along with other stakeholders. For example, when we went out to train in April, we trained along with the Pride group and Tusome. So the funding was mainly by Tusome and Pride, and we went along with them to do that training in April and again in August. But in December, we have a budget for training of the teachers that runs to the tune of a number of millions.
Okay, and this
Yes.
is coming directly from the government?
And this is coming directly from the government.
All right. Now, I think at this point, I'll bring in Amos Kaburu and probably speak about the current financing trends with the current curriculum. I mean, there is a lot at stake, not only the training of teachers, there's the resources and even the classes and what have you. What are some of the loopholes that you see in the financing of this ahead of the rollout in next year, 2019?
Thank you, Gladys, and good morning to our viewers. With me here is an expert report that gave rise to financing of the new curriculum, which is titled Education Sector Expenditure and Future Cost Scenarios under Curriculum Reform. And this is a study supported by UNICEF to the Ministry of Education. And it presents 3 scenarios of funding of financing of education. The first scenario is where we don't reform. And this is what it says. Just allow me to read it. It says, in scenario 0, population increase means enrollment increases. And that means by the year 2030, we'll be having 24 million children in the school system, away from what we have as about 14 to 15 million. So we're having an additional 10 million children in the school system. And even if we don't reform, we will need to pump in an additional 200 billion in the system annually for us to sustain even the current curriculum. But for us to reform, the report says that this increases cost to the subsector substantially, up to 716 billion annually in the year 2030. So the point is that we reform, we don't reform, we are doomed. We are struggling to finance our education, but the demands are going to increase as we move on. So we have challenges in the sense that how we design our financing of education is largely dependent on budget support and what you call official development assistance to education. So our financing of education has been very conservative in nature. And if you look at all documents, including the sessional paper number 12 of 2012, which I've just picked the extract on financing of education, it is very ambitious in terms of what it planned to do. But unfortunately, how government works is that sometimes officials get so busy into the logistics of implementation that sometimes it's very hard for them to step back and see what they can do. And this challenge is very pronounced because as we speak now, Treasury has already released plans for the fiscal strategy for 2019-2020 budget, which means well, even before we finish our second term of, the second quarter of 2018-2019, they're already planning for 2019-2020. So it's very structured in such a way that sometimes it's very difficult for you to introduce radical reforms in terms of how you plan within the macro planning environment and policy. So it is challenging at this point in time, looking at the demands in education that come with it and looking forward as it is. So we cannot afford to finance education the way we have done previously. That is the single most challenge. And I don't know whether we are so much sure of what it takes. And I really want to commend KICD. KICD have done a fantastic job. I was part of the team that went to the field and saw what they have done. But I tend to feel that the Minister of Education should have taken a more active role in terms of mobilizing and marshalling all the sagas involved. I think the Teacher Service Commission would have played a bigger role in terms of teacher training because they even have a budget for what they call a professional teacher development. And these are resources that we need to pool in terms of this will go into part of what TSC were planning to do. But unfortunately, I think there is still a lot of siloing, which one would expect leadership at a very high level. I wouldn't fault KICD, it is not their fault, but I think it requires a certain bigger voice to speak. And that's why I'm quite happy by what, like, for instance, the Attorney General gave us as an advisor opinion, that we have to go beyond these squares and see that there are certain functions which are supposed to be domiciled somewhere. So I think that that bigger voice will be quite critical at this point in time, so that next is their role in terms of the new curriculum. And they structure the resources around that. Quality assurance, the same. Teacher Service Commission, which has a huge budget, will equally play a big role. Rather than, when you look at actually what KICD had projected up to the year 2024, they are only asking for 1.7 billion for them to train teachers. This is really something that the Teacher Service Commission will comfortably cover for. So I think that a bigger voice that will bring together all these sagas and all these stakeholders will critically play a big role, because I don't think that we have a bigger project in education than it is for the new curriculum. And Kenyans have to be very, very vigilant. If we don't take advantage of this opportunity at this time, it may take us another 30 years for us to get another curriculum.
Okay, now Stella, just listening to Amos, a lot of monies will be needed to realize this new curriculum, and I'm just wondering how and what other ways of supporting this project are out there, because whether on a public level or a private level, financing is needed to make this a reality and sustain the same.
You will find that some of these costs will actually be borne by parents through the payment of school fees. In as much as our government will be funding the curriculum and the setup of the infrastructure in the schools, you'll find that some of the cost will be passed to parents. And for us, I feel that now parents really have to come in and think about how they're going to increase their savings capability so they can be able to meet the increased demands that will most likely come through to support the expenditure. So our savings culture will come into question, and our preparedness when it comes to preparing for the education of our children. Yes.
Okay, now when you think about the financing considerations, now that we are looking at how to make sure that this becomes a reality going into the new year, Patrick, will this be a reality considering we only have a few weeks to the new year?
To us, Gladys, this is a reality because the train has already left the station. And it is ongoing, and people who have gone out there to carry out monitoring will tell you a lot is actually happening at the school level. Parents who have actually interacted with children who are consuming the new curriculum will tell you they are seeing children come home and they are different. They have actually less stress, there is less homework, and they are enjoying the learning. Because we are saying this competence-based curriculum, the spirit is to change the pedagogy, change the environment in which the child is learning, so that these children can learn to appreciate the school, and at the same time the school can be able to identify the potential of the child and nurture that potential. And even parents are supposed to be keen also to help the school in identifying that potential. How does your child behave when they are at home? What do they like, what don't they like when they are at home? So that you are able to begin to tap into that potential of the child and help the child to grow and be able to learn effectively.
Okay, now I see you smiling, Amos. Go ahead.
I am not very sure if KICD understands the magnitude of the task that they have at hand. Because curriculum reforms is beyond what children are taught in class. Of course, we're moving away from the statement of teaching towards learning.
Yeah.
You need to look at it this way. And I know we've had many forums, we've even discussed this with Dr. Juan. He's a consumer of the report that I'm having on my desk. And you need to look at what is the implication of reducing primary school from 8 years to 6 years. And how many years are we talking about for children to be transiting from primary into junior secondary? What are the financing demands that it introduces? And when I'm looking at the paper today, and the private schools are saying that KICD should provide them with the curriculum designs that allow them to roll out. And I'm like, that looks very casual. Because curriculum reforms is not just about you given the designs and therefore you're able to implement them. You need to ask yourself, when you implement this curriculum that is supposed to end in grade 6, where are you going to take those children? Because there are no junior secondary schools. And as we speak now, these are big financing questions that we've not come to appreciate. What is the implication? Because you do not have any single junior secondary school. And let's give our viewers some basic math. We are retaining 12 years of education, which is quite strategic. 6 years of primary education, which means we are creating a surplus in terms of infrastructure and in terms of teachers at the primary school level. But it means that we're creating a deficit of 2 years at secondary school, but even now making the waters even more murkier by having what we are calling junior and senior. So one of the questions becomes, who will teach you in the junior secondary schools? Are they going to be separate from the primary schools, or are they going to be completely separate from secondary schools? And you need to look at, for instance, the structure of how people have invested in education in this country. Many people have invested in primary schools because they are cheaper to set up compared to secondary schools. Secondary schools are very expensive, and that explains why we have a serious challenge of everyone wanting to go to a few schools, because the investment that has gone into some of these schools, it has taken us years. Alliance didn't start the other day. You require a lot of effort for you to build a Stare Girl Center. The effort that Dr. Gachanja and friends have put in that school for it to be what it is just over the last 10 years. But otherwise, you look at our traditional 3Ks, Kagumo, Kakamega, and the Kisi School, the famous government African school set up in 1933 to respond to what was the needs of the Africans who did not have access. It has taken us more than 70, 80 years for these schools to be what they are. Now, the private sector is not very easy for them to just move in and say, we are building such status of schools. And that's why you realize some of these good private secondary schools, they are very expensive in nature. So what are you trying to tell us? You need an additional 350,000 additional classrooms. Give it a unit cost of 2.5 million. What does it mean to you? If you're talking about you need additional teachers in the system, what does it mean? The commission this morning has given us another very alarming statement, which in itself I don't find it. I have my own reservations with when the commission says that it wants to employ 70,000 teachers, when in itself it also knows that the main challenge that we face around teachers is the issue of distribution. So I'm not very sure that KICD has really appreciated the magnitude and therefore done a lot of lobbying, including I've actually argued that sometimes maybe you just need to lobby the president himself to intervene. You need to lobby parliament more, which is the budget committee, to allocate you additional resources. Otherwise, it's very easy for you to give schools the curriculum and the designs which all of them have. And that is quite fantastic, because 3 years ago when we walked into schools, schools were not having syllabus. But right now you walk into any school in this country and they have the curriculum design. That is kudos, my brother, you've done a fantastic job. But this now goes beyond that. You need to look at the financing demands that we are saying. By 2030, if you are supposed to be pumping in 716 billion, where are we going to get this money? This is close to 80% of what government is collecting as internal revenues.
I think at this point we'll allow Patrick to actually answer if you have looked into the intricacies that come with the 2663 curriculum, because as Amos is touching, there's the infrastructure, there's the increase of teachers. What are we, do you have resources to ensure that this is in place come the new year?
Thank you, Gladys. I think one of the other things that we need to appreciate is that the idea of whether we have the resources is ideally not a KICD function, as it were, because financing of education in this country is a whole ballgame altogether, because there are different stakeholders. But one of the things that I appreciate is what he has said, the need for thorough lobbying and having what we call political goodwill, so that if as a country we actually agreed that we need to reform our educational system, then different stakeholders begin to appreciate the different roles that they need to play to ensure that we are able to actually reform our educational system. So that we get the political goodwill from the president, we get the political goodwill from the government, so that when we are beginning to think about the budgetary implication, sometimes actually when you think about it in terms of how much do we require by the year 2030, you can actually look at it and begin to see like it is an impossibility. But the truth is, if we begin to look at it on a year-to-year basis, what is the financial implication for us to be able to roll out this curriculum up to grade 3 next year? What do we require in 2020? So that we progressively grow. Because if you look at it from the fact that we may require up to 760 billions in the year 2030, then as a country we can easily get scared and say this one we cannot be able to afford.
Okay, so Patrick, let's take a step at a time. Come 2019, do we have the necessary infrastructure, the necessary teachers to ensure that the curriculum is a success?
According to, number one, the Teacher Service Commission, we have the number of teachers that are required to roll out the curriculum by 2019. because the challenges that are being highlighted, even when you read about the 70,000 teachers that are required, they are struggling to address the issue of over-enrollment at Form 1. But we are looking at the competence-based curriculum up to grade 3 next year. So the teacher issue is not a big issue. The other infrastructural issues that you may look at them like they may be a hindrance. We also are appreciating the fact that there may not be any serious structural change if the implementation is up to grade 3 next year. So in terms of infrastructure, we cannot say as a country that we are not ready. I want to assure you that one, we are ready.
Okay.
But going forward is where now we need to be futuristic, to begin to ask ourselves, what do we need to do 3 years from now, when we shall now be thinking about those at grade 6 transiting now to junior secondary, and what are the implications? Do we allow them to be domiciled in the current primary schools? And ideally, is it even good for a child who feels that they have transitioned from primary to secondary to be told you are being retained in the same primary school? What are the financial implications? And I think with the stakeholder engagement, if we begin to work together so that each stakeholder knows the part that they are supposed to play to ensure that we get this as a reality.
Now, Stella, it sounds like it goes beyond just the parents putting in a bit more of their resources. Even some of these schools need to also start looking at how to ensure that they keep going, because it's not only the public schools that are implementing the new curriculum, also the private schools. So how are you enabling them to ensure that they are part and parcel of the new curriculum?
Basically, the role of insurance companies actually is not really have a direct role in the provision of infrastructure. We really play the role of assisting in the mobilization of savings and ensuring that we have products that allow parents to save so they're able to put their children through schools. In this country, we have a quite a unique culture where we save through various vehicles. We have chamas, we have cooperative societies, we have parents who save through the bank. But what we find is that insurance companies do provide products that are authorized by the Insurance Regulatory Authority. They're approved and they have the features that allow our customers, parents across the country, to be able to put up savings and thereby provide a lump sum that allows them to fund their children's education. This cannot be underscored. The discussion around provision of infrastructure really is much, much wider than what I'm talking about right now. But the burden of this funding will actually fall to some extent to parents, and ours is to assist parents to be able to save, and that will be able to help provide the education that they need for their children.
Amos, just break it down for us. How much of this burden will fall on the parents, and how does it look like financially?
Thank you. This is a very political question. The Constitution, Article 53, provides that children will receive free and compulsory basic education. Now, all of us agree on what basic education is, 12 years. Where we start the politics of it is the definition of free. And free is very loose, and it depends on who you are talking to. It was a heated campaign issue in 2017, where we were being told, when we come in, we'll provide everything. And others were like, we'll provide everything. Now, when the policy statement came out, it specified what it meant by free and said, we are going to provide free tuition. That's what we meant. So it means all these other costs are supposed to be borne by someone else. And I can assure you one thing as a starting point. Number one, I am strongly convinced that we already have enough resources in education. Not finances. We already have enough resources. And even as we construct or we design the new curriculum, one of the statements here saying that efficiency savings from the new curriculum reducing the funding gap by 33 billion by 2030. The first thing is the current financing efficient? We have a lot of resources. Even the number of teachers we are having. If today you are able to plan very well, you will be surprised that you don't need these 70,000 teachers. What is the challenge around the financing that we have? The ministry has not been quite proactive in terms of planning for our schools. And that is the reason why schools will be mushrooming everywhere. And when schools mushroom everywhere, they reach Form 4 or they reach Standard 8, and communities approach Teacher Service Commission and say, we now need teachers. What should TSC do? It can maybe only afford to send one teacher to that school. What is there for the shortage? They have shortage of maybe 4 teachers or maybe 7 teachers and such. So it becomes a serious issue. So the issue is that it could be possible for us to reorganize the resources that we have right now for them to help us achieve the kind of education that we need to achieve. But it requires a lot of policy rethinking. It requires government to be quite proactive and see the role that the private sector will play. And the challenge we have with this country is that the relationship between private and public is very adversarial in nature. It is competitive in nature. We do not see the role that the private sector will play in terms of mobilizing resources. Yeah. And it goes back to information asymmetry, that majority of Kenyans, if you talk to them about insurance, what is the first thing? They have a very negative attitude because maybe they only think of insurance in terms of car insurance, and especially there are certain things which are no goes on, such as life insurance. Like, you're wishing me to die? I mean, I don't think I can take it. But I think that both government and equally institutions in finance have a big role to play in terms of financial deepening. When you look at the policy statement, it makes some radical suggestions. I just read for you one of them. For us to achieve education financing, government in its own admission says we need to float sovereign bonds to support the funding of the sector. Has this happened? There are so many instruments which will perhaps be available for the private sector to participate in financing of education. It is not just for them by setting up schools, but there is a lot of private equity. By the way, there are so many people in this city now who are buying off schools. Why are they buying off schools? From Europe, from Germany, from UK. It's because they see that it's quite strategic. And that's why they will move in and say, give us a 20% stake in your school, in what you call private equity. These are private owners of money who don't know where to invest this money. Communities have a lot of resources that they will perhaps be willing to put in school. But when you make a political statement and say that parents cannot pay, what do? You disempower these parents and communities who perhaps have got very strong incentives. They have got very strong mechanisms of how they will finance their education. I'll give one example. This is the Nairobi City County Task Force report of 2014. That looked at the issues around education. And I was privileged to be part of the team that sat on this. And we were listening to experts from London on how they addressed the issue of financing education and issue of quality, particularly in London. As we speak now, Nairobi has a serious shortage of schools. You go to places like Pipeline and Tasia, they don't have schools. Yet you go to places such as Kilimani, you've got so many schools around it. You have State House Primary, you have St. George's, you have got Nairobi Primary. And there are no children from these communities around State House who go to these primary schools. So why do they go to school? They are supposed to be driven to many places far off. But the mayor of London looked at a model that does not allow the private schools to, the private sector to construct schools. Rather, they will be given an opportunity for them to manage the schools. And they are paid in what we call operations and maintenance contracts, in what we call public-private partnerships. So it would be easy for us to alleviate the burden from the parents if government was more strategic in how it thinks. But as I said, government is lost in the business of business. They are so busy in its business that sometimes it's very difficult to step back and ask themselves, what do we need to do for us to achieve more sustainable financing? Insurance has a lot of money. Banks have a lot of money. Individuals have a lot of money that they need just to put in the sector and be sure that we can earn a fixed return, what you call fixed income equity. Fixed income from their investments. I can be assured that I can put in 50 billion that can support to standardize schools. And examples of schools we are talking about, just walk to Kinyanjui Road in Nairobi and see the kind of school that KFW put up in what is called Kinyanjui Road Primary School. It is a school designed for one, scale, number two, designed for sustainability. Because it's a school that even doesn't need electricity, it can use a lot of natural lights. So in itself, there are already mechanisms that make sure that running of the school is a bit cost effective. But when you have got schools that are made by very poor flows, within 1 year they are already breaking off. You've got schools that have got very high energy demands. It makes our running and maintenance of schools quite extremely expensive. So we need to go back and ask ourselves, what can we do? Otherwise, it is the duty and the responsibility of the government to provide free and basic education. And it's possible to achieve that. In fact, we are overfunding education in this country.
Okay, now Patrick, how much of the private sector has actually gone into realizing the new curriculum and making it, you know, a reality come 2019?
Thank you, Gladys. Actually, in the study that we carried out on the pilot of the competence-based curriculum, we actually found that private schools had really picked up on the new curriculum. And that's why even in today's daily, you see the CEO of the Private Schools Association, Ndolo, complaining that they are ready for the rollout because they have picked it up as an investment. They have picked it up as a big investment and indeed involved even the parents to appreciate how the new curriculum is affecting them. And that's why there is the pressure that they are mounting, that they are ready for the implementation. They only need to be facilitated. But as my brother has put it very clearly, the issue of public and private initiatives, how we need to complement each other in whatever we are doing. That today, most of the public primary schools, when you look at them in terms of provision of quality education, it is actually one thing. And that's why even when you looked at the performance that was released of KCPE, you will see that the academies were outshining the public schools. How can we learn as a government to make them complement each other? So that the private individuals can be allowed to make their investments in the public sector, and at the same time, the government comes in to ensure that there is control, that the public is not being exploited. So even when in our constitution we are providing that every Kenyan child is entitled to free and compulsory basic education, it is just about how do we ensure that even when we are talking about it as being free, it must be free but of quality. How do we ensure that there is provision of quality? So that this child who goes to a public school does not look like they are already condemned, because they are going to a dilapidated classroom. They are going to learning environments that are not motivating. And when you compare with the private schools, you find real investment in the private schools in terms of the learning environment in which the child is going to learn. And as we think about competence-based curriculum, it is about changing that learning environment. Because if we leave the learning environments as they are today in public schools, even if we made serious effort at re-engineering the teachers, they still have to work in the same old environment in which they have existed, and it will tend to compromise on the attainment of the learning outcomes as envisaged by the competence-based curriculum.
Stella, somebody is asking here, you've spoken about how you have put structures in place to support the parents who are going into this new curriculum, but is there provision for now schools who would like financial support going into the same?
No, you find that as a regulated authority, actually you find that insurance companies usually have segments in which we invest, and a lot of this structures are not set up so that you can invest in what you're talking about right now, education. So we would ask possibly government, if they can come up with what you are talking about, the sovereign bonds, that is an option that we can look into. But currently what we have is just a usual government investments, which is treasury bonds and treasury bills. We don't have the vehicles that have been set up so that now we can fund education directly. Yes.
And what are probably some success stories in other countries that you would want to actually pursue and make a reality in Kenya from your point of view?
I think the example that has been shared by my colleague here on what is happening in the UK is something that we should look into. One, rightly, resources are spread out there in the economy, and you'd find the private sector can be a key investor. One, they do have the resources, they've been able to mobilize them over time, but because of the kind of investment structures that we have in place, because we have to give a return to our customers, we need to have a structure, one, that is well regulated, that is transparent, and is one where we are more or less guaranteed of the return. one. That's why you're talking about fixed income. Yeah. If we have those kind of vehicles set up, you'll find that the private sector, with the right kind of mobilization, would be willing to put in money. So with that, from there, then someone who wants to put up a school will be able to borrow from government or maybe an authority which is funded by such structures. So it's something we can look into. It's something I think we'd be willing to invest in once the structures are put in place.
Okay, even as we continue with this discussion, of course, as Amos touched, is that the government is already planning for the fiscal year 2019-2020. And it is interesting, just this past Sunday, that the president said he will be dedicating the budget, the national budget, from 20% to actually closer to 30% towards education. And we shall be listening to what he had to say right after this break. Good morning. Thank you for staying with us on AM Live. We are in the market. With me, a panel of guests that are helping us wade through the financing of the new curriculum. We're talking about the competency-based curriculum that will be rolled out expectedly. That is in 2019. Now, the 7th edition of the National Leadership Forum is being held today. Focus, repurposing education for growth, thematic areas, curriculum implementation, finances, access, equity, and quality. That's why this conversation is very timely. And still with me in studio, we've got Patrick Andika, Assistant Director, Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, Stella Njunge, CEO, Sanlam Insurance, and Amos Kaburu, Senior Program Officer, Data and Voice at Twaweza East Africa. Before we went to break, I alluded to the fact that the president did make his commitment to increasing the budgetary allocation to education from 20% closer to 30%. Let's listen in.
To the many global citizens who have called upon my administration to maintain its education budget above 20% of our total budget. But I want to go one step further. And this year, I pledge to you, my fellow global citizens, that in Kenya, our education budget will be closer to 30% of our total budget, making it probably the highest on the African continent.
Well, Amos, is this the light at the end of a tunnel you're looking for?
Oh, Mr. President, I should start by telling Kenyans what they don't know. When President Kenyatta took over, our funding towards education was at a paltry 164 billion annually. As we speak now, President Kenyatta has mobilized over 370 billion annually that are going into education. There's no one who has invested in education the way the Jubilee administration has done. That is a fact, and this is not politics. Mr. President, this is my appeal to you. You are doing extremely well. But you need to ask your implementers one question. Are you getting value for what you have invested in this education? And I'll give you an example, Mr. President. The laptop project, which you have spent over 40 billion to put the infrastructure in place. Are you getting value for it? And I will tell you that, Mr. President, until we are able to address the issue of efficiency, accountability, and wastage in the system, I am one advocate for increased funding. But at this point in time, I'll tell you, Mr. President, hold on to these resources. Keep them so that we're able to use them very well for us to roll out the new curriculum. Because the time is going to come when it will be very, very demanding. But if you afford to put in these resources at this point in time, where number one, schools do not have the capacity for financial management. Schools don't have managers. Schools rely on head teachers who are not properly capacitated. Boards of management which have got no capacities, county education boards which do not have any role in terms of financial management. It is going to be extremely difficult for them to absorb these resources. We have seen this challenge with the county governments, where you give them money, they are unable to absorb. There's problem of efficiency, oversight, the role that the oversight bodies are supposed to play, starting from the treasury itself, internal auditors, the role of the auditor general in terms of auditing. How many of our schools have ever been audited, even to look at the resources that they have? So I think at this point in time, I would say that we need to be mobilizing these resources. It is good that we mobilize the extra 10%, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to spend it next year. That is my appeal. we don't have to spend it next year, because we need a serious conversation on how we can ask ourselves, how best should we use this resource? But it's such a welcome move. It is true Kenya will be the highest education spender in this region. I mean, in the whole of Africa, because by now we're already spending 5.2% of our GDP into education. This is quite high. Actually, there are only 2 countries in this region which are leading us. That is Malawi and Mozambique. The rest of the countries, including South Africa, we are way above them. So if you take it to 6.8%, it will be actually one of the highest globally. And I tend to believe that people have been asking, why is it that education is not part of the Big Four? But it's because education is a facilitator, just like ICT. So it doesn't, the government appreciates the role that education will play in terms of meeting the Big Four, but the Big Four has got very, very urgent issues that it ought to address. So I would say that if these resources come, please allow them either to diversify infrastructure. But which infrastructure are you diversifying? Just allow me a minute on that. Look at it this way, Mr. President. You give us the additional 10%. We increase infrastructure in primary schools. 3 years down the line, we are setting up junior secondary schools. We don't need this infrastructure in primary schools. Where will we take this extra classroom? Whereas we need now for the junior secondary schools. That's why I am of the opinion that let's mobilize these resources. We can invest whether with the insurance companies or wherever. Have this money that we are sure that within 2 or 3 years, we can earn even a return, even if it's just 3%. It is enough money that can generate and create a bigger impact based on what we call the multiplier effect.
Speaking of which, is this possible, and how can we make sure that even as we progressively roll out the competency-based curriculum, that the monies will be enough going forward?
Thank you, Gladys. The way insurance companies invest is that they look for vehicles provided by government, such as treasury bonds, treasury bills. In the private sector, we go to the stock exchange and we buy equities, and then we monitor how the return is accounted for in our books, and ultimately we declare that return to our customers. What Amos is talking about is by giving the money to insurance companies would be by government floating what I think are infrastructure bonds, so that allow now the insurance companies to buy. To buy, and then from there we can be able to have the money set up to be able to fund the education. Actually, the government cannot deposit the money with us. It has to be deposited in a bank. What insurance companies do is actually buy the bonds that are out there. So for that, it would be in terms of financing. But in terms of depositing the money, of course, they'd put it in banks or through the central bank. But ultimately, you do have a point, and I think the private sector can play an important role. You'll find that in other countries overseas, you find that the infrastructure bonds are actually funded by pension funds, that you have that in the overseas economies, and that's an option that the government can explore as additional income for them, or funding for the big projects that we have in this country, including education.
Before I move on to Patrick, I think at this point, Stella, the question is a sensitization of all the possibilities within, your sector to realize this new curriculum? Do they know that these are options out there?
Actually, I think not. It's good that we are having this leadership forum because it is a start. We'll be able to raise the awareness of the need of public-private partnerships to be able to fund the education of our children. Education speaks to the heart of Kenyans, and of course our parents are key to have what is called quality education, as highlighted here by Patrick. So it's very important that we all play the role to make sure that government does meet its goals, and if the private sector can participate, it's very, very welcome. So awareness needs to be raised. I think the ministry and the government does needs to reach out through KEPSA and the other bodies and highlight the need for private sector to be able to help with the funding. And I think that given that we will know that it will be through bonds, and a regulatory framework will be set up where we can be able to put in funds in something that is secure, we should be able to participate actively.
All right, now Patrick, speaking of value for money, efficiency, accountability, good things are coming to us education sector. Amos here says hold on to that money because we might need it in the future. Do you share the same sentiments?
I actually share the same sentiments. What we require in the education sector, we must be able to rethink the financial management models that we have had in the education sector. the financial management regulations that we have for schools, for example, that allow a school to collect fees in January and continue to spend throughout the year without thinking, where can we keep this money so that it can generate something? So if we have to rethink and re-engineer our mindsets in such a way that we are able to change those financial management regulations. If a school has 4,000 students, for example, a secondary school, and each of them can pay an average of 40,000 at the beginning of the year, the school should have a model where they can be allowed to invest this money.
Exactly.
And they get some returns, even as they look forward to offering quality services, efficient services. So rethinking the financial management model. It has also to come from the top. Even when the president thinks about injecting into the education sector more funds so that it consumes 30% of our budget, we begin to ask ourselves, is this a viable option for the country? Is it sustainable? In the next 10 years, shall we be talking about increasing this expenditure so that it is, for example, 50%? Is this sustainable? So my take on this, as we invest more in education, we must be able to rethink the strategies. We must be able to bring in more private players. For example, the Kenya Publishers Association, what role can they be able to play in order to support quality education in this country so that they continue to have market for their books? Have they been brought in a way that they can even co-own some of the schools? So that we bring in efficiency in the management of the schools. The traditional approach where schools were to be managed by a board of directors that in some case is made of retirees who have no idea about what they want for the school is an old system that can never serve a country like Kenya today. We need to bring in professional management of schools so that if we have a board of management, it is made of real professionals. A financial advisor is there saying, this amount of fees we have collected, where can we be able to invest it before we use it to feed these children in the school? Because in the past we have been looking at education like it is only a consumption place. Money is pumped there and the head teacher is in a hurry to spend and declare that it is over. So I need more from the government. That is not the right way of running education in this century. Schools must be made to be self-sustaining. When they receive money, can they use it in a viable way, and can they ensure that it is available in future? So a school that has existed for 100 years, for example, should be having serious investments. They should be owning buildings in this town and generating their own funds, and now they are able to reduce the fees as they provide quality education to the students who are admitted in the school.
Again, going back to the question, are they aware that there are those options you're talking about, Amos?
The challenge we've mentioned is that there is very poor capacity, and that's what Patrick is alluding to, that our financial management model is very weak, because the responsibility of financial management lies on the principal, who is both the accounting, the administrative, and the curriculum head. And when you look at the Professor Odhiambo Task Force report that recommended that schools need to be professionalized in terms of how they are managed, that's what Patrick is just alluding to. We need to have professionalism around how we manage schools. Because when you talk about finance, finance is different from accounts. Because finance has to think of how do we raise revenues and how do we spend these revenues in a more prudent way, in a manner that is likely to generate more. So that is the component of finance. Accounts is just about you've received the money, you've had transactions, ensure that they are posted in the right way, and be able to say that this is, yes, we have actually done the bookkeeping part of it. But when you look at our head teachers, or when you look at our BOMs, as Patrick is putting, they have got very, very low capacities. And that is the reason why I say that we are having a lot of noise in the sector, whereby the different sagas and particularly the Commission and the Minister of Education, this need, and 2 years ago, we had a certain level of semblance that was already getting there, because there was a lot of, there was someone at the top steering it, and to help guys say that, wait for a minute, this is about the Kenyan children. you are in the same schools which we are in. We cannot afford to be fighting over space. So these kind of things that we are seeing the media report, TSC has taken this route, the ministry has taken this route, they are not good for the sector. It would be good that the Ministry of Education takes charge, and that has always been my argument. And that's why we talked about even the role that Parliament, the Parliamentary Education Committee has to play, harmonizing all these kind of things. There is a discussion around us reviewing the Basic Education Act 2013 in terms of looking at the structural challenges that we have, so that we build capacities of our schools for them to mobilize and equally use these resources in a more prudent way. By the way, this is my argument. If you're able to devolve education more, whereby school management takes charge of school matters, not receiving instructions from Nairobi, because as it is right now, schools can't function unless they receive instructions from Nairobi. And as we speak now, boards of management have expired. Even county education boards have expired. It might take us even another 1 year before they are constructed, because someone is busy trying to see who can I place where, who can I place where. But if we're able to build their capacity, then it will be possible for them to mobilize a lot of resources, including the communities themselves, so that you move away from the issue of money and you look at resources. I'll give this example. If you have a court of law within 2 kilometers to a high school, that is a very, very important resource that you need to use. You don't need any money. You can have a court clerk who comes to speak to your students about administration of justice, including even committee members will be made aware of what administrative justice is all about, just by having someone come tell them, you see, there are this litigation which you can have alternative dispute resolution mechanism. But our people are not aware, because we never see the functionality of the resources that are linked. How much are you paying us for being on this set? We are not being paid, but we are here to share information with Kenyans, which is a way in which we make sure that this information reaches people. And it goes back to what government has to rethink in terms of communication. Government communication has to be re-engineered in such a way that it looks at efficiency. It is not just about disseminating information, but it's about facilitating people with information that can help them to make decisions. And that is the challenge that we have. Schools are not well capacitated. Our principals do not have enough time. They are also supposed to be teachers. They are the curriculum heads. They are the guiding and counseling people. They are in charge of everything. So at the end of the day, how do they handle sensitive dossiers such as finance for them to think from the kind of perspective that we are having on this side?
Speaking of which, Stella, capacity building, very important. Some of these principals, as we're saying, have no idea as far as how to manage this money and how to make it grow so that they can be self-sustainable. Are there avenues on your end that can actually put this in place so that they know going forward, if I have this little, it can be this much at the end of the year?
Yes, you find that through the bodies such as private, through KEPSA and also the Secondary Schools Heads Association, they do have forums where they invite head teachers, principals for a week or so, where they train and actually help them upskill on certain things. We are always willing to sponsor those kind of forums, because we know ultimately we will benefit, because the children are the ones who are going to benefit. So you'll find that in all those forums, you'll find that our insurance companies do sponsor. We're willing to sponsor materials. We can even bring in speakers to educate them about certain skills that they require. You'll find that insurance companies also, at least the one that I work in, runs what we call financial literacy forums, because we realize that individuals, be it you and me, actually need to think about how we manage our money. Leave alone how you manage institutions' money, your own money. That kind of financial literacy is something that needs to be passed on to everybody. So if we are called upon to do it, we're able to organize them and provide speakers, and also provide materials, because ultimately it will mean that people are better managers of money for their own selves and also for the positions in which they hold or the institutions in which they head.
Okay, now let's talk about accountability. Patrick, Amos here touched on the fact that we had a huge mega project to do with laptops. Today, we cannot really say much about it. Now, we do not want this to be the same case when it comes to the competency-based curriculum. Going forward, what are the systems in place to ensure that what is pumped into rolling out this curriculum is actually accounted for and it goes where it should go?
Gladys, to be sure, I may not say that there are any changes in systems to ensure that there is accountability. And that's why we are saying that even as we change the system of education, we must go beyond changing the system of education to change the structures. Can we be able to have the Basic Education Act reviewed? Can we be able to have the accounting regulations of the ministry reviewed? So that as we strive to put more resources in the implementation of the competence-based curriculum, the resources are going to be put to the most efficient use, so that we ensure that there is quality in the attainment of those learning outcomes. So that will call on a whole system approach, and it will call on the need to re-engineer the entire system, so that, for example, the accounting officers know how regularly they are supposed to report, so that even the auditors know how regularly they are supposed to get those reports and how regularly they are supposed to visit schools to ascertain whether the resources are being put to the optimum use. Because what we have been having in the education sector today is a situation where funds are given to schools, but the idea of accountability and auditing has not been as effective as it's supposed to be. We have schools in this country, and by the way, I was a head teacher before I went to KICD of a secondary school. You can actually run a secondary school for 20 years without an auditor visiting you a single day. And you see, those are the loopholes that we don't want even in the competence-based curriculum. If we have to make sure that the resources are put to the most efficient use, there must be a third eye that will come to look at how you are using the resources. Otherwise, we pump resources into classrooms. A classroom is poorly built. Within 1 year, it has potholes like it was constructed 20 years ago. And yet, in records, the funds were effectively utilized. Just because nobody came to even see the type of quality work that is going on when the construction is going on. So it goes beyond just pumping in more resources into the education sector, but there must be those structures, accountability mechanisms, to ensure that somebody always comes to see what is going on. Because the role of a principal today, the role of a head teacher of a school today, he is everything. He is even working like the chief. Because when parents have quarreled at home, they come back to the head teacher and say, this lady is disturbing me at home. The child behaves like this because of the mother. So the head teacher comes in now to start providing guidance and counseling to families. Then they move to class to go and teach. Then they are supposed to be instructional leaders. Then they are supposed to be accounting officers, even when they never went to any accounting class. So the head teacher now is at the mercy of the bursar, because any record that they'll be given is what they have to go for. Actually, buzzers were very popular at our time, and I believe they still are in every school. Amos, before you make a comment on the same, there's Jim Rose here who is commenting, saying Cuba education sector is given 10% of the total budget, which makes the entire education to be free from primary to university. Food and uniform is also free. Now 30% given to Kenya, 28% will be rooted by corrupt guys. Your comment, Amos. That is, I didn't want to put it that way, but she has correctly put it as it is. Practically what it means, in terms of moving forward, what Patrick is saying, there is what we call a dysfunctionality in terms of how the agencies of the Ministry of Education work. The only linkage that we thought we'll create, and we'll mention some of the sagas which already come to your mind. You have the Kenya National Examination Council, you have KICD, you have KEMI, you have KISE, and the bigger boy or the bigger girl who is the Teacher Service Commission. Now, where is the dysfunctionality? In our structure of going back to 1968 Education Act, it was, which had we've stayed on up to when the late Mutula Kilonzo, God rest his soul in eternal peace, did a fantastic work to give us a Basic Education Act. Looks at how can KICD, which is the curriculum developer, hand over the curriculum to the teacher to implement, who is quality assured by the Ministry of Education, and that curriculum is evaluated by the Kenya National Examination Council. Do these agencies speak to each other?
Now look at how we created a legal loophole. According to the KICD Act, the only functional linkage that KICD has with NEC is that the NEC CEO sits in the KICD board and the KICD CEO sits in the NEC board. That's very, very weak. So that is where now the Minister of Education ought to come in and say, when we've just released the resource for Kenya Certificate of Primary Education, KCPE, it goes beyond the individual reporting for each child what they have got. What does it mean for the system? What feedback does KICD require from this so that KICD can say, this is how our curriculum is working? The most unfortunate thing, which I always ask Patrick's colleague, is I'm an advocate of the competence-based curriculum because this 844 has serious challenges. But you are telling us that the system will mature in 2027? Yes. So, in a very soft way, are you trying to say that these children who are in this system, you'll continue feeding them with this poison because the other ones will come and will be given something better? I have said that this is a discussion that the ministry should have led in terms of asking KICD, what are the quick wins that the children who are already in this system could benefit from? And Gladys, I was shocked when I was in the field. Schools have taken on this curriculum like fish in the water. The kind of assessment that is happening in our schools, it is shocking. Contrary to the popular thought, schools are not ranking children, but schools are capable of providing effective feedback that tells the parents, this is what your child can do. But look at what NEC is continuing to do. When you rank children and give them 400 marks, when you rank it, you give children a C+. This is a simple question. What is a C+? What does it mean when you have a C+? What can you do? What can you not do? This would be the highest time that NEC will already be sitting with the KICD to say, even as we move into the assessment for 2019, what lessons can we pick from what KICD has been doing? But I don't want to speak for this because I've been in the field and seeing what is happening. Some of these agencies are still lost in, this is our function, this is where we stop, this is our budget, we cannot go over there. And it becomes very, very unfortunate. So at this point in time, this will be my request. We need to stop all these other side shows and focus on the big project. How do we make the competence-based curriculum to work? And even be able to ask these very, very difficult questions that we're having over here right now. It is not late for us to start asking, how will we be raising 716 billion every year? This is not what we require up to that time. Every year 716. How will we be raising this money? And once this has been well explained, now we can now talk about, let's now review the Education Act. What will it go into reviewing the Education Act? What does Treasury needs to adjust for us to achieve this competence-based curriculum? How will NEC therefore have to be fashioned for it to achieve this new curriculum? How will the Teacher Service Commission need to act for us to reach this? Otherwise, if now they want to employ 70,000 teachers, then it comes next year and they realize that maybe now we have a surplus of teachers. Are they going to retrench them? They will not retrench them. So I think that all these agencies should have stopped what they are doing and focus heads to Murang'a Road. All of us sit in the Necessary Resource Center in that auditorium and start now asking ourselves, hey guys, we have a big project over here. Kesha, whether it is KEPSHA, all of us sit there. The Kenya Private Sector, Kenya Private Schools Association, all of us sit there. Investors in education, civil society organization, parents association, and ask ourselves, what does it mean? Otherwise, if we continue what we are doing, we are making this very big project and leaving it to KICD. They can only do and so give us a curriculum and say, now you are free now to implement it. But we are not thinking of it from this perspective. So that is one of the most urgent things that we ought to do. These people have to stop their routine planning that they are doing every time. And now we focus on the bigger project.
Patrick, when this rollout, I mean the pilot was being rolled out, there were a lot of concerns as to why the stakeholders thought it was being done too hastily and too soon without thinking through some of what Amos is putting on the table. Are these things that you've looked into, and was sustainability part of a conversation from the get-go?
Gladys, from the word go, there is a committee that is actually working around this idea of the competence-based curriculum, and all these sectors are represented, all the different sagas within the ministry and so on. But as he has rightly put it, I think the dysfunctions that are there can only be seen in terms of the fact that each of those sagas have their own mandate. They have their own acts that define what they ought to be doing. And so sometimes in some of these stakeholder engagements, you find each one struggling to hold on their mandate. Because before you change the act, before you change the Kenya National Examination Council Act, they will continue to do what they have always been doing. But we know from the KICD point of view, we have worked with them on what we call an assessment framework, a competence-based assessment framework that will now change the way children ought to be assessed in the school, so that there is no ranking and we don't need to celebrate only performance in the cognitive areas alone, because we are saying the spirit of the competence-based curriculum is to be able to nurture this holistic child. So we need to be able, when we are reporting about the performance, report holistically, so that we are not talking about the raw marks the child has attained. We are also working with the Teacher Service Commission, and the Teacher Service Commission has developed a teacher professional development framework, which we have developed along with them, which is meant to ensure that there is continuous teacher professional development, so that on a yearly basis, teachers will continue to undergo professional development, so that they improve on their competencies, and hence they be able to be effective in the implementation of the competence-based curriculum. So one of the areas in that teacher professional development is the idea of financial literacy, for example. So this is where Sanlam and Group can be able to come in, so that when the head teachers and the instructional leaders of schools are being exposed to financial literacy, it can be in collaboration with the financial providers, so that they have a bigger picture about financial literacy. They go beyond just the maintaining of books of accounts in the school and look outside to see which other options do they have that they can be able to leverage on. But I want to say, because curriculum development is an ongoing process, it means we need to continue engaging even more and more. And that's why even the talk that we have today in the evening is about more engagement with different stakeholders, so that as we continue to engage, we get buy-in, we get ideas, we begin to see new options that we have not been able to see as we move forward the competence-based curriculum.
Now, Stella, Devolution has brought the resources to the grassroots, and going forward with the competency-based curriculum, it's a countrywide phenomenon, and some of the counties with some of the projects that are being put before, like the laptop projects, never got to actually enjoy the fruits of the same. But now, even as these finances or these resources are being trickled down, what are the players in your sector doing to ensure that this information that we are talking about in capacity building, both for the parents and education stakeholders, are actually provided to those that are in the mashinani?
You'll find that most insurance companies have wide branch networks, Sanlam included, and because we have offices spread across the country, we actually are able to serve those areas from our branches. It is fairly easy for us to be able to use the branches to be able to reach out to teachers, for instance, in Garissa or in Kilifi or in Kwale, or all the way to Mumias. And you find there's a lot of interaction between our branch managers and the financial consultants, and in those interactions, some of this information is passed across. You will find that when there are forums that are organized, for instance, if you can put together groups of teachers from a certain area where they can be educated about whether it is insurance products, you'll have the financial literacy skills also being passed on to some little extent. But there's a lot that can be done or should be done in this particular area, because financial literacy is not something that can be passed on in one engagement. You need to have a constant engagement. You need to meet with people, educate them about what money is. It never needs to go beyond the teachers. It also needs to go down to the children, so that even when children, by the time children are leaving school, they understand what money is, what it can do for you, and how you can save. So the private sector can come in, because we already have the networks. We just need to partner a little bit more with the government. And I think we are open to those options.
And definitely that's why the conversation we're having tonight at the Nation Leadership Forum is prudent, so that everyone can know what part to play. Now, Amos, you were speaking earlier about the standardization, and this brings in the quality of this curriculum going forward. Before, we have seen there's some parts of the country that have not enjoyed the fruits of the free primary education, or even just having the right to education. With this curriculum being rolled out in 2019. What can the government and the stakeholders involved do to ensure that every child enjoys the same quality of education?
Thank you, Gladys. As I had said earlier on, I must commend the Institute for one, ensuring that all our schools have the curriculum designs. You know, Gladys, I've been a teacher, and even throughout when I was a teacher, we never had a syllabus in our school. And Patrick will tell you, most of our teachers teach using textbooks.
Yeah.
They don't refer to the curriculum. And so the capacity of our teachers to interpret the curriculum sometimes is a bit challenging. And this is what you mean by interpreting the curriculum. The overarching principle in a curriculum, the first time KICD have introduced what they are calling the vision for the curriculum, and even the mission, nurturing every child's potential. Now, under it, you'll get what you call the goals or the aims of education. And what Ominde gave us in 1964, all commissions have come and say that they are all of them valid. Apart from David Koech, who increased education for lifelong learning, and there was one additional more. But goals such as education for national development, education for national unity have remained relevant throughout. Now, when a teacher walks into class and is teaching perimeter of a circle, how does it relate to national development? It looks very casual, but the point is that every interaction that a teacher has with the children in class should be able to see how it links with the national goals of education. And this is one of the greatest challenges that most of our teachers have had. And it's based on even the way these teachers are trained. It's based on how even the programs that we've had around teacher professional assessment have had to be conducted. And that's why studies even by World Bank have shown low competence rates among us, even our teachers. So the first thing that therefore you have to do when you listen to KICD telling you that we are building capacities of teachers, that is the first step that you need to ensure. You train your teachers for them to change the mindset, because this curriculum is not just about the teacher saying that we changed from topics to strands, from subtopics to sub-strands. It is about the mind shift. It's about the paradigm shift in terms of how I think about planning for my instruction. And planning for instruction, which even the Director of Quality Assurance have always got it wrong, is to assume that when you walk into a school and you ask, do you have a scheme of work? Yes, I have. Do you have a lesson plan for the lessons that you're having? I have. Do you have lesson notes? And even that's what TPAD is doing. So once you have them, it becomes a checklist. 1, 2, 3, you have. Or you don't have. Can you produce them? Quickly go and work on them and you bring them over here. And we assume that that is planning for instruction. That is not sufficient. And that's what KICD are spending a lot of time trying to reorient our teachers in terms of how you plan for education. That is the first thing. And it may have its own set of challenges here and there, but I must really commend them for starting that process, and number 2, for ensuring that all our schools have got curriculum designs so that our teachers can look to them and ensure that this is what we are supposed to offer. Number 3 are now what you're calling the course books. And it's good because I know KICD are even planning. They have worked on the budget. I don't speak for them, but I've been able to follow what they are doing to ensure that schools are actually provided with books. And it is not the responsibility of KICD to provide books, because you have the FP grants. And what happened, like in the case of this year, because we've had the Tusome program running for a number of years, and they had textbooks which were from a cost efficiency perspective, they were equally good. And of course, teachers were struggling with how to infuse the Tusome content into the new curriculum. But that is the first way to start. Because let me tell you, Gladys, if our teachers were very well prepared, they can use even this newspaper to teach our children the new curriculum. Because let me tell you, this newspaper, even just the headline alone, has a lot of curriculum content areas. It has got talent, it has got mathematics, it has got creative writing, it has got everything. So you do not need 10,000 textbooks in a school for you to teach or to instruct children. And that is what KICD are trying to do. How do we support our teachers to rethink of how they offer instruction? And it's wonderful that you go to any part of this country, Mandera, you go to Wajir, you come to Nairobi, you go to Bungoma, you go to Kakamega, where I come from, and our teachers have been given some basic skill. That's a good place for us to start. So what we just need now to ensure is that next year, we ensure that there is total peace in our schools. In what way? We have got very little industrial unrest in our schools so that our teachers are comfortable in the schools. Number two, we have got high-level support in terms of the ministry taking leadership, TSC coming on board, and KICD now just being the facilitator or being the one on the driving seat, but not necessarily meaning that they are doing everything, they are the ones training and all that. So that when we are sure that we have achieved these system stability and no system harmony, or there's a lot of quietness in the sector, it's possible for us even to collect more reliable data in terms of what is working and what is not working. But I'm 100% sure that from where we are starting, primary schools, they are not costly for us to start implementing the new curriculum. It will not require a lot of resources as the way we are putting. We're just putting the question 3 or 4 years down the line, it will be too costly, and that's what we need to think about. Otherwise, I think as it is for now, we need to sustain this momentum, build on to it, and I'm sure that our children will continue getting a better education.
All right. Now, Patrick, definitely the new curriculum comes with, you know, some needs. For example, the materials to be used.
Yes,
some will probably need extra classes to put in some of the skills into play. Now, for a student in Nairobi and that of Wajir to have the same at their disposal, what are the resources that are being pushed to the counties to ensure that everything reflects the same?
Gladys, first of all, the notion that all students can have the same learning environment, naturally it has never been possible. The reason is because the schools have what we call natural endowment, that even if you gave them same amount of funding, you gave every school an equal funding, the environments in which they exist tend to vary. And therefore you will find one school better endowed than the other. But there are various initiatives that are being put in place, especially you are aware of the effort by the government, for example, to ensure that at least every child gets a book. And this has picked up especially for the grade class 7 and 8, and then from 1 to 4, they have been facilitated, and even schools that were having problems in terms of getting the learning materials today, they can be able to celebrate that they have. So the ministry is making an effort to ensure at least there will be adequate supply of the instructional materials. But we are saying even when the instructional materials are supplied, all the stakeholders will have to work in harmony. For example, the county governments have to come in and appreciate the need for provision of quality education. How can they ensure that schools within their counties are not disadvantaged? Because you are aware that we have counties in this country, Wajir, Mandera, Garissa, where even the type of teachers that are being exposed to the children are actually not trained teachers. And you know the reason. The type of insecurity that those areas have experienced, where teachers from outside those counties have had to run away. Meaning that now, even when you begin to talk about quality education in some of those counties, the child there is disadvantaged because they are being handled by a teacher who is not trained, even when you give all the resources. And these are the areas counties can begin to come in, ask themselves, what role are they going to play to ensure that there is a harmonious working environment for the teacher? So that a teacher from Huisero who is posted to Garissa has a reason to stay there. They don't need to sleep on a tree because they are imagining they are going to be attacked at night. You know, those environments, how do we ensure? That's why what Amos is talking about, they need to ensure that there is a peaceful environment for all schools. So that those teachers who are in Lamu, Mogoe Primary, for example, very close to Boni Forest, and every day they sneak to school, they are worried. Are they safe? You know, and these are components that the counties can really be able to play, because the safety of the teacher determines how effective they are going to be in the classroom. The safety of the parents, even the way, the type of environment the parent creates as home, has a lot to do with the roles that the counties will have to play, and they will all have an impact on education of the child. So it requires what I call a multi-sectoral approach, so that each and every sector of this society is playing their role effectively. So that, as Amos has put it, come January, when all the stakeholders are on board, the way we have managed national examinations, all sectors came in to play their role. This should be the same case even when it comes to curriculum implementation. So that when we need security, security is provided for all schools. We don't have cases like what we have had in Central Baringo, where schools can be closed for even 3 months because of insecurity. So when you are thinking about implementation of a quality curriculum, there are so many factors that come into play to ensure that the curriculum can be implemented effectively and that the outcomes that we envisaged in the curriculum can be attained. So that as a country we move towards the attainment of the 8 national goals of education.
Okay, now, gentlemen and lady, even as we close, I'll start off with you, Amos, as a parting shot, going into the new curriculum and looking at the financing of it, which speaks to the sustainability of it. What would you like the stakeholders to keep in mind?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to assure our parents that the new curriculum is well thought out. It's particularly around the content area is very, very well thought out. And if you look at the reception even from private schools, it tells you a lot, because the private sector sometimes is usually the most difficult to conscientize. But when they tell you that something is good, sometimes you really have to pay attention to it. But if we are not careful, this could entrench more inequalities. And that is the reason why we need to think of this austerity, financial prudence. We have to think about sustainability. We have to think about additionality, complementarity in terms of how we are designing everything. And it's important those people who have who sometimes the top leadership seeks their opinion. They are not just acting conveniently, but rather they need to offer some very critical, responsible advice. For instance, when a cabinet secretary asks you a question, do not just be quick to respond before what is convenient, because you feel that is what will be right at that point in time. I think the leadership of this country means well, particularly from State House, what we've seen the President Committee himself do. He means well, particularly for this curriculum. And KICD will tell you that he's the one who asked them, why are you taking long to implement? Why don't we start? Because he saw it was a good idea and felt that it was quite right. So we need to build on this momentum, but however, just ensure that it is these small little foxes that can end up spoiling the broth. So we just need to make sure that we tie up all these loose ends, focus on the bigger goal rather than focusing on our small little things where we are. It's a big project that all of us need to focus our eyes on, and definitely be able to give our children an education that can guarantee them of a future in a very competitive world in the fast changing global society.
Stella, definitely bringing it home. Apart from the stakeholders, actually one of the stakeholders in all this are the parents, and it is imperative that they understand that there is a part they will have to play, and it would have to do with their finances. So going forward, what would you like to suggest that they keep in mind?
Ultimately, that quality education for your child is something that everyone holds dear to their heart. The solutions are out there in terms of products, so that you can be able to fund those needs. Ultimately, that the level of awareness of these changes in terms of what it means for their children and also for them in terms of financial impact is something that needs to be put out there. Awareness also to the insurance sector about what the new curriculum means to the country. And also in terms of funding, if the regulatory framework is set up and they reach out to financial companies, I think something can be done. But we must have the right framework in place so that all stakeholders' interests are taken care of. But insurance companies actually exist, life insurance companies, to provide this kind of solutions. They've been there for a long time. Reach out to your financial consultant and he'll be able to give you some advice about how it will be possible for you to make sure, if you're the one who's funding your child's education, that those needs are taken care of.
And going forward, when you see a salesperson speaking to you about education policies, don't run, listen to them.
Don't run. The awareness on that particular part is something that we really need to work on. That trust deficit has played its role in making sure that actually people view an insurance consultant as someone who's bothering them. Actually, let's remove that lens of the bother and actually look to the need that that person is sorting out for you. And it's very key for you. Usually it comes to the fore when you have an unfortunate event. That is when everyone realizes and wishes, I wish I had put something in place to take care of my dependents.
Okay, Patrick, KICD has been at the core of making sure that the competency-based curriculum is a success. As you said, rightfully said when we were starting, all stakeholders have to be in on it for it to be a success. Your parting shot.
Gladys, my parting shot is that the competence-based curriculum is probably the second best thing to happen to this country after the discovery of our M-Pesa. And I wish to appeal to all stakeholders to appreciate the fact that each and every one of us has a role to play in ensuring that the competence-based curricula succeeds. More so, our parents need to appreciate and know what roles are they going to play. They have to do what we call parental engagement. Play their role effectively by creating a home environment where the children can be stable as they go to school. And plead for what we call political goodwill so that all our leaders appreciate the role that they'll have to play. The parliament has to come in to ensure that we have sufficient funding, and above all, those in charge of implementation ensure that there is prudent management of the funds so that we achieve the learning outcomes that we want our learners to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick Andika, Assistant Director, Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, Stella Njunge, CEO, Sanlam Insurance, Amos Kaburu, Senior Program Officer, Data and Voice at Twaweza East Africa. This conversation definitely continues tonight, 6 to 9 p.m. at the University of Nairobi Auditorium, even as the 7th edition of the National Leadership Forum comes to you. Focus this time round is repurposing education for growth, thematic areas, curriculum implementation, finances, access, equity, and quality. This has been AM Live. We have been in the market financing the new curriculum. My name is Gladys Gachanja. Have a good day.